Is the Omens of Destruction worth a buy? The Omens of Destruction has arrived, and I'm delighted to give my unfettered and unabridged opinion of it today. No BS, no funny business, just my opinion on whether you'll enjoy the new DLC offering for Total War Warhammer 3, and whether I think it's worth your hard-earned money. My name is Blake, and I bid you my fondest welcome to Blake's Takes, where today I'll be giving you my take on the Omens of Destruction. Is my take hot or not? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. As always, we'll go faction by faction, and I'll round out with my conclusion. We'll start with the Skull Taker. With the Khorne DLC, you'll get access to the Skull Taker and his faction beginning in Lustria. If you thought Lustria was crowded before, it's about to get a whole lot more chaotic. You'll certainly be running into a lot of legendary lords very quickly, so you best make sure you're prepared. Uzul's faction mechanics mainly revolve around killing enemy champions and collecting their essence to empower your Skull Cape with some pretty potent bonuses. Some are much more powerful than others, like the ability to immediately teleport to another lord you can see on the campaign map, and you retain all of your campaign movement to follow up with an attack. Having this skill really levels up the campaign, so make sure to get it. The campaign has a great variety of enemies for you to smash, as any faction starting in the Lustria Bowl can tell you. Lizardmen, Bretonnia, Cathay, the Empire, they're all there, ready to get smashed for the Blood God Khorne. Legendary hero Scylla Anfangrim also joins the party. He has a Mortis Engine effect, draining the health of all enemies around you whilst in melee, and he's very fun to watch him belly flop into the enemy lines.
Kobe!
He's a very potent hero, so it's definitely worth it to follow the quest to get him. He's also a siege attacker, so stick him in a different army to the Skull Taker and you can get through enemy settlements at twice the rate. You also get Scar Bloodwrath, who I didn't actually find on my campaign, but he's a big strong character killer. He'll do absurd damage to even the toughest single entities. Bloodspeakers are an interesting supportive lord. They're kind of like a cultist. Some good supportive abilities coupled with some buffs to campaign movement range. They're a solid choice on a War Shrine mount. Now we get onto the units. Blood Beasts, they're sort of like a lower tier version of Minotaurs. They're fast and smashy. They hammer through most similar tier troops. They're quite fragile though, so it's best to cycle charge with them. Minotaurs are much better than them though, so it is best to swap them out to Minotaurs when you can. They definitely use the Rat Ogre skeleton for these guys, but I'm fine with that. They look great. Khorne are a solid anti-large troop. A bit faster on their feet than Chaos Warriors, so a good option for chasing after faster moving targets, which larger units do tend to be. They can Vanguard deploy too, so if you're after some sneaky shenanigans, then these guys are your troops. Then you have the Skull Reapers and Wrathmongers. Both serve a similar function of anti-infantry blenders. The Wrathmonger's key difference being that they have armor piercing, so can get through any infantry, whilst the Skull Reapers are more useful against lighter targets. Both good troops, though they both serve a very similar purpose. Then onto the Slaughter Brute, a big, unwieldy single entity monster. I wasn't a big fan of the Slaughter Brute. It has big armor piercing damage values, but it's quite fragile. It has a very low melee defense, and I thought it was a bit clunky to use. Certainly not my favourite. It's tough with Khorne because, as a faction, they are lore accurately quite one note. Smashy, killy, fighty things. So when CA adds more smashy, killy, fighty things, it's a rough job to make the new additions feel unique, or fill in gaps in Khorne's roster that didn't exist before. I must say though, I'm impressed with CA's attempt at this. It's not a bad offering, and there's definitely a fair chunk of new units in there to keep skulls piling up for our Lord Karneth. The campaign is really fast-paced and bloody, as any Khorne campaign shall be, and this works really well for the Skull Taker. Now onto the Ogres. Golgfag Maneater, the Mercenary Lord. What a campaign this was. It was absolutely fantastic. It's funny, I didn't expect to enjoy the Ogres as much as I did. and I really think that it's a bold new step for Total War Warhammer 3. They've got a great sense of the scope of what you need to be immersed in a campaign. I really didn't expect the Ogres to be the highlight of this DLC, but I've had so much fun enjoying the contracts mechanic. The whole thing felt really immersive. I just had such a blast packing up my camp and moving over to the Hell Pit, which became my faction's de facto capital after I finished a contract for Kislev, role-playing as good guy Golfag. It was just a great surprise to see the Ogres get so much love put into them. And there are certainly some issues, like not being able to send food to your armies, having one of your armies sat outside of a camp which is full of food and that army is starving is a bit immersion breaking. I think the pack-up camp system is good, but it could be better. It'd be nice if the camp turned into a lord which you could control and set down the camp in other places. I think it would give you a little bit more flexibility than an arbitrary 5-turn reset. Perhaps it could become its own unit or an icon which you could move around the campaign map. I think that would make it a more interesting mechanic, and you could then use the garrison in there a bit more too. But despite those critiques I have on its implementation, I'm just really glad that the feature has finally made it in there for the Ogres. What's great about Golgi's campaign is it doesn't feel restrictive. You can sandbox and conquer the world like any other faction, or you can vie for the mercenary route and basically ignore settling new territories. Unlike the Changeling system, this one doesn't feel anywhere near as restrictive as it did with their cult system, so I think this is really good. Now onto their units. Noblar Pigback Riders are very silly to look at tier 1 spear unit. They're a wacky addition, but they do serve an important function which the Ogres previously lacked, and that's some early game anti-large, so they are certainly useful at the beginning. Yetis are pretty average monstrous infantry units. They offer some nice debuffs to enemies, but I found them to be very fragile, so you probably only ever want to pick up one of these in an army to support your mainline troops with those debuffs. They won't do a lot of damage, but they have magical attacks, so they're quite useful against certain targets, like demons for an example. Golgfag's Man-Eaters are an excellent anti-infantry Man-Eater variant. They have double the armour of their regular Man-Eater counterparts, they have a bonus versus infantry, and they can Vanguard deploy for more sneaky shenanigans. They're just a fantastic unit overall, and you'll probably be wanting to get a lot of them. Then you have the Thunder Tusk. This monster comes with two kinds of range attacks. A big snowball which fires out, as well as some cheeky ogres throwing spears from atop it. This thing is a beast in melee, so overall a fantastic super unit which will be a staple in your late game armies. It's also great to have a melee hero which can support your lord in dealing with other lords and heroes, and the Bruiser is just that. It definitely felt like something was missing before, and I think the Bruiser fills that gap nicely. The Paymaster Lord is another interesting choice. They're not great at fighting, but they have some fantastic supportive abilities which will make your units really shine in battle and give you some nice rewards in the overworld campaign map. Finally, as a legendary hero, you get Bragg the Gutsman. This imposing legendary hero is crazy fun to use. He has an execution ability which immediately kills single entity units at 20% health or below, and he has an excellent damage over time effect which can be unlocked. Just overall an excellent legendary hero. I really enjoyed his addition into my armies. Now onto the Greenskins and Gulbad Ironclaw. It was a bold choice starting Gulbad Ironclaw off in Black Crag, and I have to say I don't think it's paid off. Grimgor Ironhide used to start off his campaigns in Black Crag, so this campaign felt a little bit too familiar for me. It's a campaign I'd felt I'd already played before. This isn't really helped by the lackluster campaign mechanics. The plan, I found, was really quite dull. The impact of the plans are just simply too small in the early game to really pay too much attention to. For example, 5% upkeep reduction on your orc units for 5 turns. It just doesn't really do much. Gulbad's plans just didn't hold my attention as they were simply too minor in scope. Considering the unit requirements and the resources you'd put into actually getting them unlocked, I found myself kind of ignoring them for the most part, which is a shame. I think with some minor tweaks, like removing the unit requirements or making the plans a bit more impactful, this could be a very good mechanic. But in its current state, I just didn't really enjoy it. It's not a bad campaign, I don't want to put you off purchasing it, but I just felt in comparison to the other legendary lords, Poor old Gorbad drew the short straw. The Greenskins, I feel, also didn't get the greatest in selection for their new units which were on offer here. You have, for example, the Goblin Bolt Thrower, which I found to be about as useful as a marzipan dildo. Terrible accuracy, poor damage. I never recruited these, and I would get annoyed when they turned up in my war armies as a waste of a slot. The most impactful units which you receive are the Black Orcs with shields. Finally, the Orcs get their sturdy frontline holding unit. What a delight. But I have to say I was pretty annoyed to find out it was part of the DLC. I had assumed, when I made a post boldly declaring my hype for them, that they would be added for free. As we already have the Black Orc with great weapons model, it doesn't feel good to have a unit like this paywalled. It feels a bit stingy, if I'm honest. They're an excellent unit when you stick them into Bulwark mode, and they'll be able to last against even the hardest hitting enemies. But it's just such a shame that CA has paywalled these, because I think the Greenskins have been in desperate need of them since Warhammer 1. Now, you get a couple of stumpy late game units to sort of make up for these. You have the Colossal Squig, which I kind of hated. It's a massive target, it's a bit derpy, and it dies pretty quickly. Also, it rampages when it's low health, so that immediately puts it as a poor choice for me. But the model is cool and I like the animations. I just hate the rampage mechanic so much. But if you can tolerate the rampage mechanic, then this thing is a pretty good cycle charger. Then you have the Arachnarok Flingers, these great catapult-laden spiders. The ranged attack does a heap of damage and slows enemies. It's also got a great range and a fantastic trajectory of the projectile. It has a similar trajectory and firing arc to a mortar, so it's particularly effective in sieges. It can also stomp enemies in close quarters, so this is a very strong monster, and rightly justified as requiring a tier 5 spider den to recruit it. I'm not sure why they're blue though.
What? Is there something on my face? Why am I blue? Does everyone glow blue? What does blue mean? What does blue mean?
Mangler Squigs also make an appearance. These guys are an extremely potent anti-infantry machine, probably a little bit too potent with their explosions on death, and I think their erratic animations might keep them alive a little bit longer than they should. Anyway, a very cool unit, and I love the animations for them. For your Lord, you can now access the Savage Orc Shaman Lord, and this guy's very good. He gets access to a Wyvern mount, so he's the only Greenskin caster which has access to flying, which will make him very useful in sieges again, dropping foots of Gork on the enemy. Then you have a hero in the form of the Night Goblin Big Boss. He's not too bad, he buffs squigs and can summon some for himself. He also increases campaign movement range as well, so he's not a bad hero. Pretty good to plug into a squig heavy army if you have one of those. Also, I love this one's little hook arm here. Very cool. Finally, we have Snaggler Grobspit as a legendary hero. He massively buffs spiders. He's a pretty fragile hero in of himself, but the buffs he drops on spiders are absurd. More damage, melee defense, certain resistances. His spider buffs are incredible. He basically does what Gorda's Backstabber does for Hobgoblins for the Chaos Dwarves. Spider Riders become very viable, even in the later stages of your campaign. You can also spawn a bunch of Spiderlings, pair him with Rachnic Spiderclaw, and you can swamp the enemy in Spiderlings until your heart's content. He's good fun and very thematic. So, what do I think? Is the Omens of Destruction worth a buy? Well, I've personally had a blast playing these campaigns. Khorne campaigns really appeal to my bloodlust, Golfag's mercenary contracts are really well done and thematic, and Greenskin campaigns really appeal to my bloodlust. All three campaigns get my seal of approval. There's been a lot of work put into the factions, and I think the race tweaks coming alongside the patch will also be greatly received. Despite my criticisms of the Greenskins campaign, it's still fun. I still had a great time. I will, however, circle back on the point about Black Orcs with shields being a DLC unit. I don't think that's great form from CA, but it's certainly not a deal breaker for me, as there is a plethora of other content for you to explore in the pack too. I didn't notice any crazy bugs outside of the ordinary Total War jankiness. Overall, I think this is a solid addition. I don't think it's as good as the Thrones of Decay, and I don't think that the new factions will be as impactful, but I can see a lot of love went into making a lot of these characters come to life. There are certainly some issues, like sieges still being pretty bad to play, and I'd love to see if CA has plans to address these in future. But in the meantime, this is a solid offering, and I won't let my grievances with other areas of the game cloud my review of it too much. Anyway, I'd love to hear your opinions on this. Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And I just want to give a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters: D, Joshua Krager, Dinkle250, Robert Diorio, Gonk, Paugus, Hunter X2, Veteran of the Long War, and Hatoris Kurz. I've been Blake, delivering my take. Thank you all so much for watching.